Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full Press Fantasy Sunday, live here, week 7 on October 23rd, 2022. As always, I'll be talking start sit decisions, whether it's my own or from the chat. If anyone does want to chime in, ask their questions, I'm gladly give my thoughts and opinions. And as we approach to game time, I'll also give the updated inactive player list, so we find out who's in and who's out. Also talk about some maybe questionable players later, how we deal with that. So again, feel free to ask any questions, whether those are start, sit, or otherwise. I'll do my best to answer. If there's any trade questions, I know I've still got some pending trades out even this morning and some things of that nature. So always making moves in fantasy football. And one thing George Carmi and I introduced last week, and Washington home game this week, so George will not be available. I guess I should introduce myself. I am Kyle Senra. Usually George is the Full Press Commanders managing editor. I'm the Full Press Packers managing editor. I also co-host the Full Press Fantasy Pod. So both of which I do podcasts, really technically 3 podcasts a week for Full Press coverage. A pair of Packers podcasts. We'll always preview and then recap the games, and then a weekly episode of the fantasy podcast as well. So Brad Harvin, my co-host there, and I, we debate our rankings every week, and you can find those rankings on fullpresscoverage.com. Harvin's Heroes for Brad, and Senra Says for myself, and just check out those articles every week on Full Press Coverage. I also provide a weekly goal line guide article, and as I was saying earlier, George and I last week we introduced the start sit spreadsheet that I do every year. Now I'm doing this for a couple seasons, I should say, and just as kind of my way of when I have got difficult decisions. I want to look at a lot of factors and I kind of put it all together. I'm very visual, especially when it comes to numbers and things like fantasy football. So I like just getting them all on a spreadsheet, which I will share here shortly. And so I suppose that's where we'll start, to be honest. Before I start that, just go to my bookie for a double deposit match using our Full Press Coverage promo code. That code is PRESS22, so all caps PRESS and the numbers 22. So PRESS22, and the deposit match that'll go up to $1,000 on my bookie. So I just want to get that in there and let people know in case still time to get bets in even for Sunday mornings or for Sunday games this morning. So I think we'll get right into it. I suppose I'll just give me a minute to share my screen, and we'll talk start sit decisions. Okay, so the first thing looking at this spreadsheet is, first off, I'll go through all the factors that I utilize here. Typically, I've got any league, and I kind of go through and I look at all my leagues. Usually do this Friday or Saturday. I look at 2 things. First off, what are the questionable players and what do I have to know for that? And then secondly, where are my start sit decisions that I really have to make? Typically, how I go through a week is Thursday. I'm very binary, yes or no to this player. Should they be in my lineup? Yes or no. And then from there, though, for the Sunday and Monday games, I'm very calculated with this. Less just binary 1-to-1 decisions. Sometimes it is, and which can sometimes make it easier. But the factors I look at are production. 3 production ways of looking. One is the just average fantasy points per game for that player. Then also, what's the worst they've done and what's the best they've done this year? So I get the sense of the range of outcomes. And this stuff I get from whatever fantasy site I'm using. So wherever the league's on, I think every fantasy league I've ever played on, you go to your lineup, you check your players, they'll give you that info of their production, and you can look the stats at least, at the very least, they'll give you an average kind of like this, which is what I prefer to have. And, take into account injuries or whatever, just want to know what the average points per game of players producing. So all that anyone can kind of get from their own leagues. Now, the next 2 factors I get are from Football Outsiders. I get this information: the offensive line rankings and the defensive DVOA for the opponent. So whatever the team's defense is. And I like that Football Outsiders. And to get access to this, you need an account. although it is free to join and subscribe. So it won't cost anything, but you will need to still join to get access to all of this data. But at the very least, it's not costing anything cost-wise. There's Football Outsiders like premium packages to get more, but to access to these two statistics, their offensive line rankings and their DVOA information, you can access with the free account. And what I like about both is they separate it to run game and pass game, so it can distinguish for running backs and wide receivers. The defensive ranking, which you can see a lot of these are blankets because these are on Sleeper and on the Sleeper desktop anyway. I don't have access to that. Some other, Scott Fishbowl League, for instance, is on MFL, as is this DTHQ and DNC League. So this is just the like the ranking for the defenses, again, looking at the defensive matchups, which is why I have it next to the defensive DVOA, but where's their rank in points allowed to that position specifically. So the team that, and like how the defense ranks. So that like the 32nd ranked defense means they're allowing the most points to that position. So it is a quality ranking similar to the offensive line rankings. So for instance, here 32 means that's a good matchup because it's I guess the Houston Texans are allowing the most fantasy points to running back in this league scoring. Whereas here the 13, which isn't horrible, but it's I guess the New England Patriots are allowing the 13th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Big hint, I'm not going to play Equinemius St. Brown. Anyway, so the last three columns are really about the teams themselves and the offenses. One is just, and the first two are the Vegas lines. You can get this from any sports book. Honestly, I get them from, in Canada, we have TSN, which is it's a company owned by ESPN. That's basically their affiliate for Canada in terms of like how they broadcast. Obviously there's way more CFL games on TSN, for instance, than there's on ESPN. But the idea is like, it's essentially they get like their data fed through a sports book. I'm pretty sure it's FanDuel is what it is in Canada anyway, as their official sponsor. So that's kind of where I'm getting those data from. It's really the FanDuel over-under implied team totals. Well, the over-under for the game, but then also I want the individual implied team totals as well. Like even this first one, the it's the opposite. Normally what you see is sometimes like, okay, a really high scoring game, but should the underdog really benefit from the high scoring game? And in theory, especially like a pass catcher, okay, maybe they get more targets because they're behind, but in general, I want to know what the individual total is. It's funny here, it's the opposite, where the Jaguars of these three teams anyway have the highest implied total, but the game total is the lowest. Maybe it's because the Jaguars shouldn't be favorites, but that's another rant for another day. And then the final one, article I referenced earlier, the goal line guide. And this is something I do every week to look at teams' efficiency, scoring touchdowns inside the opponent's 5-yard line, but also the defense efficiency of preventing them. And then, to be honest, the implied team totals do feed into this as well. But altogether, it creates, I suppose it's a metric that I call my goal line grade. And kind of like I was talking with the offensive line rankings and the DVOA, I'd split it rushing grade and passing grade for each team. Anyway, so now that I go through all those factors, one of the things I do is I fill out the spreadsheet, and then what I do is I mark in green the highest of each category and in orange the lowest. Again, very visual, so I like to see that and just kind of give myself an idea. And normally what I'll do is I'll kind of count through, okay, who's got more green than orange and who's got more orange than green, and kind of like by what degree. And especially in some of these decisions. So some of them are easy. Some of them are just very much, okay, I've decided just between two players, like here. Wan'Dale Robinson or Tyler Boyd. And thinking, Wan'Dale, did get, had a decent week last week. It was, only 4 targets, but he got the touchdown. But then I want to see, is that worth playing against Tyler Boyd? And you can see it clearly isn't. In almost every category, Boyd leads. Even this one where it's offensive line, both offensive lines are bad, so I didn't really give an edge to Boyd, but that was one where it's clearly Tyler Boyd. So sometimes I just go through and put all this in, and okay, it's really easy and obvious, play this player. Other times, not so much. And like, so what I've got actually, I guess 3 up here, like maybe the 3 more difficult ones, but what I'll do, and I'll even show some down here, is sometimes like this one, for instance, I got 2 flex spots to fill and I've got 6 players I could do. So sometimes what it looks is, once I go through and see, okay, there's a really obvious guy that I should play and shouldn't. So here, for instance, once I put everything in, even though he's a backup running back, there's points per carry. There's kind of extra things to boost running backs a little bit. It kind of made Brandon Bolden kind of a must start. Man, this team's really good, and it sucks that Brandon Bolden kind of feels like a must start this week. But this deep league, I think it's start 12. So the two back end starters, there are 10 really solid starters, and there's some players on bye week. But to get those last two, Brandon Bolden, just looking through this quickly, seemed like he was the first most obvious one. Like, I think one of the things I factor in, he's not the lowest in any category, and I think it's just more high floor. His average points not the best in this league. Ceiling's not the best. That kind of all belongs to Mo Alley Cox, but also the context of the reason Mo Alley Cox average points is the highest out of these players is because of this. Like, he had one just monster week that's just skewing his average. His floor is, he had a 0 last week, right? So it's interesting to kind of just get it all together and see how it all fits in. But anyway, so looking at this, Brandon Bolden seemed like he was the one guy to put in one flex spot, and then from there, Equinemius St. Brown, and then to a certain extent, Ian Thomas seemed like the two to avoid. So now I've suddenly kind of what at first was I've got 6 players to put into 2 spots. Now I've diminished it down suddenly just by doing this to I've got 3 players to put in 1 spot. So now I just decide between Mo Alley Cox or the 2 receivers, Richie James, Demarcus Robinson. Honestly, especially the way you can see how Robinson dominates a few things. It's all the production based metrics, the goal line grade, and then the team totals, right? The Ravens offense, and just Ravens playing the Browns, but because the Ravens offense is favored by such a heavy margin, and that's kind of the credence here with both of these is Bolden and Robinson both have over 26 point implied totals for their team. So Raiders and Ravens expected to score a lot of points. No one else has that. I mean, the Colts at 19.75, the Giants at 19.75. And again, maybe the Giants should be favored. So they're maybe being punished by the fact that they're underdogs in this spreadsheet, when I think a lot of people are kind of saying like that seems like an obvious sort of underdog play. Like they should be the favored team. So it's easy to pick on the Giants, or pick the Giants in a sense. So maybe this implied total should be higher for Richie James, but right now I am leaning towards Bolden and Robinson, but I'm for sure putting in Bolden. And then again, I've sort of diminished my decision from really complicated to slightly less complicated. I've half the number of players I'm deciding between, and now I just have to pick 1 spot. So that's kind of how I go through. Just another quick decision here was Montgomery or Chase Edmonds. And at first I was leaning Edmonds, but then kind of just plugging it all in because I'm afraid of, again, a lot of this 28.5 goal line grade that Montgomery has, or not Montgomery, the Bears run offense has, is the lowest of any team this week. So I'm kind of afraid of the ceiling aspect. Like, I think the touchdowns will be hard to come by. And frankly, it seems like Herbert's been getting more touchdowns than Montgomery anyway. So ultimately that maybe shouldn't factor in too much. And I think that's why I'm going to go with David Montgomery based on still more usage than Edmonds, especially as a pass catcher, and better. It's funny, as much as we say the Bears offensive line is bad, running wise, their offensive line is actually okay. Football Outsiders has them at 14th in their adjusted line yards. Now they're 32nd in adjusted sack rate. So like they're their worst pass protection offensive line, but that's also important to distinguish. And that's why, again, I like the way Football Outsiders does the offensive line metrics and rankings. The Bears offensive line is actually decent. The Dolphins running is not. So there's some factors that once I plugged in, my initial instinct said Edmonds because I was so afraid of the matchup with Montgomery. But then looking at this, it was okay. No, I'm going to go back to David Montgomery. I also think I've got Damian Harris in this league. So this is one where I can stretch this decision out to Monday night and decide then if I'm going to play Montgomery or Damian Harris, but looking like Montgomery is going to be the start there. So a few other tricky decisions. I'll concentrate on these top 2 because I think it might be some that are relevant to most people. So the first one is Kareem Hunt, James Robinson, and Drake London. I've got to start one of the running backs and one in a flex spot. And so again, looking through the spreadsheet, my instinct has been, I think I missed out on the Drake London's first week. Okay, you're not sure with the rookie. I think I played him in some spots, but not others. But after the 2 or 3 like really solid performances, I've kind of thought of Drake London as a must start every week, and he's put up now 3 not so good performances since. So it's tricky to go with, but ultimately, and it's this league's a full point PPR, and I kind of want to flex as many wide receivers as possible on those. So it was, as much as I kind of considered maybe benching him, I think I'm going to go with London, and then simplified the decision to just one running back and one flex. I think what decided that was just, again, looking at comparing, green representing highest in a category, orange representing the lowest in a category. London was the highest in 3, but only the lowest in 2, which is only positive. I think, who was it? One of them was neutral. Kareem Hunt's neutral with 2 and 2, and then Robinson highest in highest in 3 categories, but the lowest in 4. So a negative there. So it was close, but London being the only one positive made sense. And I also looked at where he was the highest. So in floor, which at this point they're all below 5, so maybe it shouldn't factor in too heavily, but the ceiling, better ceiling performance. Now, Kareem Hunt was also close to that. And his average is also comparable to James Robinson. So it made it for tricky between all 3 of those. Don't love the goal line grade, however, but ultimately I think I'm still kind of sticking with London. The matchup against the Bengals does kind of leave to think that that's going to be more of a shootout, and that does would in theory favor the pass catchers and the receivers. So I think London, I like the game script for that, as well as what he showed his first 3 weeks. I don't think it's a mirage or a fluke. Doesn't mean he's going to do it every week, and we've seen like kind of the other shoe fall in 3 bad weeks. But I don't think it's suddenly like what he's been the last 3 weeks is going to be him the rest of the season either. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but he has shown access to a good ceiling. So whereas James Robinson, he's shown access to a good ceiling, but not 23.1 still pretty good, but just 2.5 points lower than Drake London's best game. But it also seems like Robinson is clearly descending, because those first few weeks was very much based on him getting a lot more work than Travis Etienne. That's kind of diminished these last few weeks. I think I still have Robinson ranked ahead of Etienne, but if it continues, it probably won't be the case next week. But so anyway, what I've done here is, okay, I had 3 players I wanted to decide between, and then for 2 spots, now I've set Drake London in the flex. Now I can really just simplify it down to 1 running back between Kareem Hunt and James Robinson. And I went back to my weekly rankings, which are on Full Press Coverage, and I do have Kareem Hunt ranked higher than James Robinson. So my inkling is to go with him right now, but it's really close. And especially what I do is when it gets down to just, when you've gone from multiple players down to 1, then I just look at straight 1 for 1 on these player categories. And if I look at it, Robinson, higher average, higher floor, but 2.9, 1.2 isn't that significant. But at the same token, 25 points is a ceiling versus 23.1, not so much different. Kareem Hunt is the better offensive line. They're ranked 6th, but the Jaguars are almost the opposite of the Bears, where they're 30th. They're one of 3rd last in the league in their run offensive line, but their pass protection offensive line is better, which we saw with the Bears was their 14th in running, but 32nd in pass protection. So, but that also makes up for it by the fact that the DVOA matchup with the Giants is better than that with the Ravens. I think the Ravens passing game DVOA is much higher, and higher number meaning more production allowed when you're looking at defensive DVOA. So edge to Robinson there. And then you've got kind of, in terms of implied team total, it's close. Technically it's not close. Sorry. Hunt and Robinson. So edge for Robinson, but I mentioned this earlier. Robinson has the higher implied team total because the Jags are favored against the Giants though. And it's kind of, because it seems like everyone's saying the team that should be favored isn't. Both teams' implied total are lower in order to make the Jaguars favored. They're predicted at 25.75, and maybe that's true. Maybe the Giants should be higher than whatever they're at, 19. But either way, it's making that game total low. So while the Jags have the higher implied total, the game total is not as high, which in theory would favor running backs because, again, favored team, but a lot of people are saying the Jaguars shouldn't be favored. So should we really? That's a tricky one that I know. Part of me is kind of looking then at the goal line grade. If these teams get down to the inside the red zone, inside the 5, who's more likely to score the touchdown? This says Kareem Hunt as opposed to James Robinson. And I think part of that is all of Robinson's touchdowns this year have come from longer distance. I think he may have 1 touchdown inside the red zone this year, but it's been big long runs. It hasn't been that it's been a good effective short yardage offensive line. So part of me is leaning Kareem Hunt because of that, because everything's kind of so even. This idea of the who can access their ceiling more, it would seem to be Kareem Hunt. So anyway, that's one where I'm leaning. The other one is Courtland Sutton, Tyler Lockett, Mike Williams. And this was tricky. And I think one of the complications, and I guess this is a good transition to get to the next topic of questionable players that aren't at the 1 o'clock games, but later. and that's the case with Tyler Lockett. Now, the one thing that really helps me is all three of these players play at 4 p.m. Eastern or later, or I think it's all at 4 p.m. Eastern, or the 4:05, 4:25, whatever their starts are. So I'll know if Lockett's in or not before I have to decide to put any of these guys in the lineup. But the idea is, which of these two receivers do I want to play out of these three? And it's, love to have one of these players in one of the other leagues, where some of the other leagues, I don't like, there's not any good players. So I'm going to have to decide to make two suboptimal players and put them in the lineup. This is, man, I have so many good players. I got a bench of really great guy, but that's a good team to have. That's the good problem you want to have, as opposed to the other problem. So it's, Courtland Sutton with a new quarterback with Brett Ripien, Tyler Lockett, while if he plays, still not 100% with the questionable, and then Mike Williams. Seems like Josh Palmer's out. Rumors are that I don't know, maybe Keenan Allen plays, maybe he doesn't. That's still tough to know for sure. But I guess if we're at this point, we don't know that he's going to play. If he does play, he's probably not going to be 100%. So that just the narrative alone was kind of leaning towards Mike Williams. And then looking at, again, the categories, he was, a +2, four categories where he's the best, 2 where he's not. And not too much of a difference of those 2 where he's not, to be honest, in terms of his average points per game at 4.98. It's within a point of both Sutton and Lockett. His floor is technically the lowest. He's had the worst game, and I think he's done this a couple times. But he's also hit his ceiling multiple times, like the 26 point plus. He's done that a couple times. Still, technically, Lockett has the higher ceiling. And I think this rings true this week. Courtland Sutton having the lowest ceiling of these would make sense with Russell Wilson, but also I think with Brett Ripien. So, but ultimately, I think the 2 that I'm leaning towards are Lockett and Williams. I've put Mike Williams in for sure, and I think a part of it is just the injuries to other players on the Chargers. But I am leaning, if Lockett's going to be healthy, to put him in over Sutton. And even if Russell Wilson was healthy, I think I'd still say we trust Geno Smith more. Certainly the Seahawks would say that, and that's worked well. So that's going to be one where I'll know for sure later. But so that's kind of just how I make my decisions start sit-wise. I'm just going to check in. Okay, no questions here. So I guess the next thing that I will talk about is going to be the with Tyler Lockett. Like, what am I doing with players like that are questionable? And Lockett is certainly one where, like, this one's obvious. If Lockett's out, I'll just play Courtland Sutton, even though I've kind of decided I'd prefer Lockett. If he's in, I'll play him. Keenan Allen's another one where the complications there. I'm thinking back to some of my leagues. I think I do have that written down, to be honest. So with Keenan Allen, in one league, I'll just throw in DeAndre Carter because I've already got Justin Herbert in that league, and I kind of the idea of, I remember trading for Keenan Allen in that league was last year anyway, in a dynasty league, was to get the stack, and it certainly helped last year. I thought it could be efficient and help this year. So picking up DeAndre Carter as kind of that stack handcuff, especially with Josh Palmer out. I think he's one of the 4 main targets if you count the running back, I suppose. But Mike Williams, Gerald Everett, DeAndre Carter, Austin Eckler, that's going to be where a lot of passes go. So there's a few leagues where I'm playing DeAndre Carter, and this is be another one. Not all the leagues where I have Carter are ones where I've got Keenan Allen, but certainly the one where I do have Allen, that makes a kind of easy pivot in. I think I've already I don't think, like, in that league I've got Carter already in, and that was okay. If Allen plays, then I might decide to put him in. There's another league where I have Keenan Allen where it's a flex spot, thankfully, so I can go with some of these running backs like Brandon Bolden I mentioned earlier. Who knows if he, as a backup and sort of pass catching running back, there might be games where he gets good usage, especially recently. Who knows if Renfro plays? It seems like Waller's out. In need of pass catching options. Those would be the type of weeks where I'd throw in Brandon Bolden. Also have Tevin Coleman. That I might have been more excited to play him before Christian McCaffrey was traded. But speaking of Hunter Renfro, that's another one where I've got a couple leagues where deciding between Hunter Renfro and Nico Collins, for instance. One of the spreadsheets had decided between Hunter Renfro, Nico Collins, or Corey Davis. And so those are leagues where I think I've got Renfro out now. Another league, I could replace him with David Montgomery because it's a flex spot. or Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And I've got Patrick Mahomes in that league, so I'm kind of leaning that, get the stack. I know he put up a 0 last week, but go back to my goal line grades. The Chiefs have the highest, Chiefs passing offense anyway, has the highest goal line grade of any team this week. So, and I think part of that is because it's just so difficult to run on the 49ers that teams have had no choice, and they've had more success, efficiency-wise anyway, throwing on the 49ers near the goal line and being able to score touchdowns that way, as opposed to running on them. The defense is really efficient. I think they've only allowed touchdowns on like 30. I think it's right around 1/3 of their rush attempts against them. I think it was less than. I think it was 31%, if I'm not mistaken. So 31% of the time the teams run on the 49ers inside the 49ers 5-yard line, they don't score a touchdown. So I think part of that feeds into just teams being more efficient passing that way. And so I like it for the Chiefs, because naturally it seems like the Chiefs are just a better goal line throwing team than running team anyway. So I think it all coincides together. I'll go back to trust MVS this week. And again, in certain leagues, this is a league where, again, having the Patrick Mahomes stack, if I'm buying into that anyway, I think that's the kind of spot I'd like to do that in. I already mentioned Tyler Lockett. So Cortland Sutton in one league. There's another league where I've got Brandon Cooks, actually, and thankfully the Texans play at 4 o'clock. So that's kind of an easy replacement there. I think one of the things that saved me there from like having to play Brandon Cooks at all this week, or needing to, because I still could, was the second highest goal line grade team this week is the Cowboys passing offense, and their run offense is like 6th highest. So playing the Lions, right? I'm all in on playing a bunch of Cowboys players, but I played Noah Brown in a bunch of spots, and that's a league where I have, and that's a 1 o'clock game. So, start Brown earlier, but the advantage there is I can kind of save Brandon Cooks in case Tyler Lockett goes out. So still having the upside there. So whereas in some other leagues I have Brandon Cooks, he's like locked into the lineup, must start. But this is a league where because the reemergence of Dak Prescott coming back to the lineup, the matchup against the Lions, I'm willing to just jam Cowboys players into my lineups a lot more often this week than I would in other weeks. And I think, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, you're probably going to play them anyway. Noah Brown, I think, is the biggest beneficiary of that. He's in my top 40 this week. There's a lot of spots where, I'll play Noah Brown in quite a few leagues. So we'll see how that goes. If Noah Brown is a poor game, there'll be a couple leagues where that'll affect me poorly, unfortunately. But that's kind of the risk I'm taking. And again, everything I kind of talk about, advising to people is usually things, or always things that I'm willing to do myself. And that's kind of how I've always approached it anyway, is what do I do? What am I doing as a reflection of what I advise people to do? Because the things I'm doing, I clearly believe in. That's why I'm doing them for my team. I want to win. And when I'm talking about my teams, I do play in some IDP leagues, and there's been a 49ers safety, Tulana Hafanga. Hafanga is his last name. And, he was, I picked him up in a few a couple IDP leagues off the waivers after he had a few good performances to start the season. He's just been continuing to stack that together. A lot of tackles, but it's kind of the players I like to do when you have IDP flex spots, especially if the tackles are not super overvalued. I've seen some leagues where tackles could be worth 1.5 or 2, and it's okay, just get the linebackers. But I've also seen some IDP leagues where tackles are only half a point for like even a full solo tackle. So half tackles are a quarter point, right? So those are leagues where, okay, if you get an IDP flex spot, you almost want the safeties that can get the tackles, but can also more likely to get interceptions and some turnover worthy plays. I mean, Hafanga has been fantastic this year, but he's also questionable this week. And because it's a later game, you may have fewer options. So a couple of the spots, these are the players I went and picked up. A couple Alexes. Alex Singleton and Alex Highsmith. Alex Singleton's a linebacker for. He was with the Eagles. I think he's with the Broncos. Yeah, he's with the Broncos because they're playing the Jets. And part of that was my thinking was because I hear Alex Singleton, I think Calgary Stampeders. He was you played in the CFL for quite a while, so that's I'll always think of him first as a Calgary Stampeder, and then what team is he on this year? But yeah, he was with the Eagles for a couple seasons, and now with the Broncos this year. But anyway, Singleton, part of the reason I selected him was because he playing the Jets, a team that seems like they're going to run the ball a lot. That's what their recipe has been in these wins, including against the Packers last week, and so I expect this would be a game that that players will be able to rack up a lot of tackles, specifically linebackers. And Singleton is maybe slightly undersized, but faster, certainly for his age as a linebacker. So could be, if the Jets do run the kind of outside stretch runs that they did against the Packers last week, he can still kind of keep up and be able to get some production. If Hufanga plays, I'm playing him because he's been so consistent and so good this year. And the Chiefs offense is one of those. You almost want the good offenses because they'll be on the field for so many plays, which gives the defensive players a ton of plays. Like there's been some weeks where do I want to play this player against the Bears? But I've been scared to because they run so few plays that it gives the defense less opportunities to make the impact plays because they're always going out in third, 3 and outs and punting away or throwing interceptions. It's great if you get the player that gets the interception, but if you don't, it lessens. So Hufanga against the Chiefs is a good matchup in that sense, especially a team that probably will throw a lot. So I want to play him if he's healthy, but if not, I want players that I can replace him with. So the Broncos play at 425. The Steelers play at 820, and that's where Alex Highsmith comes into play. In that league, just I think big play bonuses. So you either want pass rushers that can get tackles or defensive backs because they can, specifically safeties and strong safeties at that because they'll get a lot of tackles, but also have the chance at big play. So getting a pass rusher like Highsmith, I think was the best player available. Already mentioned the Dolphins offensive line, not great. So that's a good replacement again, because he plays later. I'll know if Hufanga is in or not, because I do want to play him if he's available. But okay. So anyway, I've talked enough about my leagues and how I'm approaching it, but that's again, how I feel I can give the best advice and the most honest advice, and just kind of share my process more than just, give the answers. Of course, if anyone does want to ask, feel free. But yeah, I'm going to check the inactive player official list now. So we'll go through that and, get everyone ready to, set their, make their last minute lineup changes. All right, just give me a second here. It's funny because NFL.com used to do it, and then they last year stopped. So I had to find new sources, but they've gone back to publishing it right on their homepage. It's easy to find. So that's usually where I will go to. Anyway, so Browns, Ravens, we'll start there, and I'll just go through and talk about the inactive players. And again, what they're sharing is the inactive players. So if there's a player that's active, they're not listed, but then we could kind of take from that a little bit. If they're not on here and they're not on injured reserve, they're going to be active. For instance, Ravens don't have Gus Edwards listed here. I assume he's active because they activated him off the PUP list. And they're making Mike Davis an inactive. So that tells me the 3 running backs there are going to be Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, Kenyon Drake. And the news of Edwards starting, there was quite a few leagues where I was starting Kenyon Drake. Now I'm kind of thinking pulling him. I think I did already kind of pull him in a couple spots. Like that one league I was talking about earlier with playing Noah Brown. I think originally in that spot I was going to play Kenyon Drake, but then Noah Brown suddenly in the lineup. So, Gus Edwards in, so take Kenyon Drake out, kind of use any reason to take Drake out. I think I'm going to still start him in a league or two where I needed him to start, but that'll be an interesting one is the Ravens today. I think I'm even starting Justice Hill in a spot. But yeah, a 3-way committee is kind of scary. So I'm not super excited about Kenyon Drake as I was a few days ago. For the Browns, Anthony Schwartz is inactive, and he hasn't really done much this year. Really does make the 3 main wide receivers anyway: Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and David Bell, the rookie from this year. David Njoku as a tight end, kind of eating in there, and probably is maybe even the number 2 target on the team behind Amari Cooper. But I had Amari Cooper as wide receiver 10 this week. I think he'll do great. He's got to be in every lineup, I think anyway. Buccaneers, Panthers. Julio Jones still out. Not too big a surprise, but Russell Gage does return to the lineup this week. I believe he missed the previous game. For the Panthers, Baker Mayfield's still out. I think they'd kind of mentioned through the week he was unlikely to play. I think they announced pretty early in the week that PJ Walker was going to get the start. So I think I'm only playing him in 1 league this week as opposed to 2. So that's nice. But yeah, he was pretty awful last week. The 2 or maybe even 3 spots I played PJ Walker. I don't know if it gets much better, but like it's sometimes it's mostly in super flex or even 2 QB leagues where, like, I know for one of them, Jalen Hurts is on bye. And I was trying to trade for Taylor Heineke. That's one of those where that offer's still out. I tried to buy Taylor Heineke for a third, and I'll go check once I'm off the stream. If that person accepted and I get Heineke, I'll play Heineke. If not, I'll just play Walker for another week and hope he gets another start next week when Justin Herbert's on bye. But but that's kind of how I'm approaching the Panthers. Like McCaffrey was the only Panthers player I wanted to play. I thought would be a good play this week, and now he's not even there. I think I'm starting Hubbard in a league that it's a 1-5 team, kind of a rebuild dynasty team. Tons of picks next year, so this is more just about getting bodies in the lineup. But yeah, I don't really want to start any Panthers player if it can be avoided. Falcons Bengals. Anthony Ferkster's inactive. It's weird because they did that the first couple weeks, and then they brought Ferkster in, and he would come in and vulture touchdowns. And now he's back to being out. I don't know if that says much. The only Falcons tight end you want to start every week is Kyle Pitts anyway. I know I'm playing Zacchaeus in a couple spots. So that's, again, part of my thinking earlier when I was explaining why I wanted to start Drake London is potential shootout against the Bengals in the sense that we expect the Bengals will score points and the Falcons will need to pass the ball in order to keep up. For the Bengals, Logan Wilson's inactive. So that may impact some IDP players at linebacker, and then Stanley Morgan out. He's kind of been that's a healthy scratch more than anything. Now, I guess the big news with the Lions, DeAndre Swift once again inactive. So I know I've had Jamal Williams kind of ranked inside the top 10. I think I have him at running back 12 right now. And I noticed in the Fantasy Pros expert consensus ranking, he was outside the top 30. So everyone was kind of ranking Swift, expecting him to come back, and luckily I don't have to adjust my rankings now. I kind of always anticipated Williams. I have Williams. I think I started him every league I had him in. He's in the lineup. I know that there's, I think one of those spots I had Swift on the bench. I know I've got Swift in a couple leagues, and I kind of tracked where he was going to be. So I guess like that one league I showed earlier where I was still deciding between Kareem Hunt and James Robinson. If Swift was active, I would have just played him and not even worried about either of those two. So that's still that decision to make. I think there's one league where I might go in Marquez Valdes-Scantling in a flex spot. So that's I would have loved to play Swift over him, but again, I think the Chiefs passing offense will do well this week, so I'm willing to go back to Marquez Valdes-Scantling even after getting the 0 last week. No, again, for Cowboys, I think it's really more defensive. Nelville Gallimore, and frankly, again, IDP wise, defensive tackles aren't necessarily the popular pick if you're forced to play defensive lineman. I think you'll usually take edge rushers, defensive ends. So that's probably I think that impacts the Cowboys real life more than it'll impact fantasy managers. Giants and Jaguars. So Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney are inactive. I don't even know if that's news, but that's right. Like it seems like Wan'Dale Robinson's the number one receiver on that team, and I'm not sure that either of those two, even both coming back, changes that. So really the only receiver I want to play, I may consider James Robinson in a spot or two. The Jaguars, Jamal Agnew's inactive. So this is one that he was questionable coming in. Means, I like Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, I suppose. Zay Jones, that'd be, even then, like, I think I might have him outside my top 40 or even just on that borderline. So not necessarily excited to play Zay Jones, but yeah, I'm all in on playing Christian Kirk most week. I know he had a bad week last week, but I'll go back to that well. Colts Titans. Shaquille Leonard's out again, so that's been the case most of the season, unfortunately. Also, yeah, big, I guess, for both, tackle, heavy tackling inside linebacker, Zach Cunningham's also out. Rookie wide receiver for the Titans, that is. Cunningham's out for the Titans, and then rookie wide receiver Kyle Phillips inactive this week, and then rookie wide receiver Treylon Burks also on injured reserve, so he's not listed here, but he's not playing either. So I think Robert Woods is, borderline top 30 receiver this week. I think I have him maybe 30, somewhere like 33 to 35, if I remember correctly. I'll play him in the spots I have him because I don't really have a choice. Stuff like, Justin Jefferson being out on bye or Marquise Brown getting injured kind of made it so that's difficult to not play Robert Woods. I'm not overly excited about him though. Packers Commanders. This is one that's actually kind of surprising. He's limited through the week, but he's been limited all year. And it almost seemed like I was just talking yesterday, if anyone watched the Full Press Commander stream. Oh, yeah, I think this is the week that they finally give Bakhtiari 100% of the snaps and don't keep bringing Josh and Eijman in. David Bakhtiari is inactive for the Packers. So all this talk of maybe moving Nijman to the right tackle and moving it Elton Jenkins in, that's completely gone. So you left tackles, Josh Nijman, right tackle, Elton Jenkins. And I still think Zach Tom should be in over Rice Newman. I know my Full Press Packers podcast co-host Jesse Hall will agree with me there too, and we'll see. Christian Watson's inactive. But I guess Sammy Watkins is active, returning to the lineup off injured reserve. And Randall Cobb goes to injured reserve, so he's not listed here. But the three main receivers this week will be wide receivers anyway. Alan Lazard, Romeo Doubs, Sammy Watkins, with Robert Tonyan should also get a lot of targets. In terms of how I would start those players, Lazard would be the one, let's say it's a flex spot and I got all four to decide between, I'd play Lazard. But then after that, it's probably Tonyan, to be honest. And he's probably going to be in more lineups anyway, because unless you're, for the streaming tight end perspective or the not heavy invested in tight end, picked up guys off the waiver wire, he's probably one of the better ones out there. So I'd play Lazard for sure, play Tonyan. Doubs where you need to. Have to be pretty desperate to play Sammy Watkins, I think, coming off the injury. So that's where I would hold. A couple of wide receivers and actually a tight end out for Washington. Diami Brown, Jahan Dotson, the rookie who's missed a few games this week, and then also Logan Thomas, all three inactive. But John Bates, who was questionable, will get the start at tight end. He is active today. And those are all the active inactives. I guess it's almost 12:15, so I'll head out of here in a few minutes. It doesn't look like I had any questions, but appreciate anyone who has been watching. Hopefully just my process through this is, hopefully me walking through my process helps people out. One thing that I didn't mention, I guess I kind of glanced over with the Ravens. Rashad Bateman returns to the lineup this week, so he is active. I already mentioned Watkins active. Yeah, but just kind of looking through. So Rashad Bateman returning to the lineup. That's right. I forgot to mention that one. He was questionable, but not on the inactive report. So that's the one thing I used to like about NFL.com is they would give active and inactive. They'd tell you both, so in case you'd forget. But yeah, I think the important thing that they say is just who's inactive, and then if the player's not on injured reserve and not on that list, it means they're playing. But yeah, I guess to kind of highlight some of the things I was talking about, some of the decisions I'm still kind of going over. Kareem Hunt versus James Robinson, that might be something people are deciding. I'm leaning Kareem Hunt, to be honest. And then Tyler Lockett, Courtland Sutton, and Mike Williams, having to bench one of them. Right now it's Courtland Sutton. Obviously, if Tyler Lockett's out, that makes that decision easier and just play Courtland Sutton. The other thing with that league too is I've got almost said Wan'Dale Robinson. I've got Jaylen Waddle, and he's questionable though for Sunday night, and I don't want to risk taking the 0, and I don't have anyone else that I could get in restrictive league on when you can pick up players. So I can't actually pick up someone to replace him. So I'm keeping Waddle on the bench. If we get news before 4 p.m. Eastern that Waddle is active, but I don't think we are going to get that. If we do, I'd play him for sure. But because of the nature of what the time he's playing, I don't want to risk taking the 0. In other leagues, his upside is so great that I would, if I was able to go pick up a player, I would have, and then I'd just play Waddle and then have another receiver to kind of, if he doesn't go, I could plug someone in either Sunday night or playing Monday. But again, this league, I can't actually pick anyone up. So I don't have a choice but to leave Waddle on the bench. But that's kind of the one thing I guess I didn't talk about was, Jaylen Waddle, big questionable. And that one's tricky because there aren't many options, and the options that are there aren't great. Like, I think maybe like a Devontae Parker might be the best available of between the Sunday night game and the Monday game. I suppose if Waddle's out, you could look at some of the backup options on Miami themselves. Trent Sherfield and Cedric Wilson would be the two that come to mind the most. So like if you have Waddle and they're questionable, those would be kind of maybe the 3 players I would look towards. I don't really want to trust any of the Bears. Like, I suppose Dante Pettis and Equinemius St. Brown could be available, but I'd rather go with a Devontae Parker. I suppose if Tyquan Thornton, the rookie's still available. He got a touchdown last week. I don't know that he necessarily is going to do that 2 weeks in a row, but that'd be an option. And then, Trent Sherfield and Cedric Wilson. If I had to pick one, for Waddle being out, it probably means more targets for Trent Sherfield, it seems like, who's kind of emerged as the number 3 wide receiver. So that'd probably be the guy I'd try and look to go pick up if Waddle was there on your team. Anyway, that's my parting advice I'll leave with. If you have anything else you want to discuss with me, I'm on Twitter @SenraSays. Also, check out the Full Press Fantasy Pod every week at FPC_fantasy pod. And my co-host Brad and I, he's on Twitter at the rundown_BH. He and I will discuss rankings every week, debate them. Even on Twitter right now, you can check our biggest difference debate, which this week was Michael Gallup. I think it was something like 18 or 17 spots difference, maybe 16 spots difference. Quite significant. So part of what I was saying earlier, I'm jamming in the Cowboys players in my lineups. I'm upping them in the rankings. I've got Michael Gallup in the wide receiver 2 range. I think I had him at wide receiver 22. So nope, all in on Michael Gallup, I suppose. And Brad is not so much. So that's a great, you can chime in and vote on the poll. There's still time before the games today. And do you agree with my ranking of Gallup at 22 or Brad's ranking, which I think is wide receiver 40? So just chime in, let us know, and appreciate any interactions anyone gets and gives us. Next week, George should be back. So he and I will again discuss start-sit decisions. I'll run through my spreadsheet again, talk about the processes I do, and maybe kind of outline why I'm making certain decisions. I always feel that's better than just saying what I'm doing, also why I'm doing things. And hopefully that's what could really help people make his best informed decisions for their own teams. And again, we'll talk actives and inactives, update everything on who's in, who's out, how to I also like giving suggestions on how to approach the questionable players for later games. Talked about Keenan Allen, Hunter Renfrow, Tyler Lockett, the defensive player, Tulanu Hufanga from the 49ers, and then, of course, Jaylen Waddle here at the end. We'll touch on all that next week. Once again, I'm Kyle Senra at Senra Says, and thank you once again for watching another episode of Full Press Fantasy Sunday. Bye for now.